Hey, this is Mike from the band Withered, and you're watching RichardMetalFan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 126 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, here at a private location in Lithia Springs, Georgia, and I'm here chatting with my friend Mike from Withered. How you doing, buddy?
Great, man. How are you?
Doing pretty well. It's you invited me to your lovely little humble abode.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing an interview.
Yeah.
So kind of like the format is, I want to do like a rundown of your catalog as well as talk about like your journey as an artist from where you started to now. But I'm always curious because I saw on Metal Archives like you also play drums, but then you also a guitarist. But kind of like what came first, guitar or the drums?
Yeah, guitar was definitely my first love. And when I started a band in high school, we were practicing in my parents' garage, and I kind of got, after playing with the band, I got tired of just playing guitar by myself when we weren't having rehearsals. So I got a little bored, and I ended up jumping behind our drummer's kit and taught myself how to play drums. Yeah.
Yeah, is this the drum kit in question?
No, this is Bo's actually from Withered. That actually is that's my first drum kit way up there, which is probably off camera, but
yeah. So what were like the first bands like growing up that really got you into metal? What was like the first bands was like, that's awesome?
Oh, the very first was Metallica for sure. I was 12, I guess, and I'd already wanted to play guitar and was starting, but my only exposure to harder rock was my sister being into a lot of like hair metal and stuff like that. So I listened to a lot of Motley Crue and Rat, and that was pretty cool. But I think I was watching MTV one day, and the One video of all things came on, and it was so moody and dark, and the theme, the Johnny get whatever that movie was called. I forget. It was Johnny Get Your Gun or something. like that.
Johnny's got his gun.
Johnny's got his gun. Yeah. So that was like my first real exposure to sort of a darker existential trauma sort of perspective in music, and it blew my mind. I was obsessed with it after that. So that was the first one to kick off, and then I got a lot more serious about playing guitar and spent the next few years literally learning the Injustice for All album front to back. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so from what I saw in Metal Archives, I don't know what came first, Social Infestation or Puaka Balava.
Puaka Balava was my high school band, but we changed names like 5 times throughout high school. Yeah, and then it lasted just a little while longer out of high school, and that was the one I played guitar in. And then in my senior year of high school, me and our singer met Chris Freeman, who wanted to do this kind of crusty grindcore band, Social Infestation. So, and I had just started playing drums, so I volunteered to do that.
Yeah, tell me about like that self-titled EP, which came out in '96.
For which band?
Social Infestation.
For Social Infestation. Golly, it was such an innocent thing. I knew a guy that worked at a record store up the street from the guitar store that I worked at up in Dallas, Georgia. Yeah. And he had a home studio, and he recorded our whole EP for like $50.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just like a demo kind of thing, and then we next thing we knew, we were playing house shows in Atlanta. Like there used to be the Idify House, and did some. And we're pretty fortunate. We got to play with a lot of really cool bands from back then.
Awesome. So. Did you like play like Masquerade back then?
Oh no way, man! That was like playing the Masquerade back then was sort of like as a kid this ethereal like. One day I'll get to play the Masquerade. It was pretty interesting. I mean, we did end up playing there ultimately. Once we started playing bars and clubs and stuff, but we mostly were doing the house shows, and Somber Reptile was real big for a while with the punk bands, and then the Rec Room. But then all that got shut down because of the Olympics.
Wow.
Yeah, they kind of wanted to like clean up all the neighborhoods next to Georgia Tech, so a lot of that stuff went away. But
yeah. And kind of breaking off that, in '97 you did a demo with Necroflesh. Like, tell me about that. So nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah, actually, Necroflesh was what Puaka Balava, what was before Puaka Balava, but the same band.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was the same band, and we decided we got tired of what we were doing, which was kind of like a groovy death metal thing. By that time, I was getting bigger into like Swedish death metal.
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So we were kind of taking off that tip. And then also that was like when the new metal era was real big. Not that we were so much into that, but just things were just groovier in general, right? So we were kind of like going down that path.
Yeah, and I was like really young when that new metal stuff, like the first Korn album came out the year I was born.
Oh wow, yeah. I was like, I guess I was in high school, I think. When that
I cite like new metal bands. Like I say, if it wasn't for like Linkin Park, I wouldn't have gotten into Cannibal Corpse. So it's kind of funny.
Sure. Yeah. I totally get it, man.
Yeah, but kind of going back into Social Infestation, I know the last two releases you did was Redemption is Only Skin Deep. Steve,
That's
tell me
correct.
about like that.
Yeah, that was our first like serious recording, right? We actually budgeted 2 days in the studio to finish the whole record versus going in for an afternoon, which is what we were used to doing. And we did that at Lead Belly Studios. I don't know if you're familiar with Lead Belly or not. Been around for forever.
Is it still around?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Matt Washburn opened it. This was right after he first opened. It was up in Woodstock, actually.
Oh, it's not far from where I'm at.
Yeah. And then I think he's moved now. He's in Dakula or somewhere like that.
Yeah. And then I think the last Social Infestation release was Lacetate.
Laciate o Speranza. Yeah.
That's a tongue twister.
It is. Yeah, it's Latin. And what is it? It's that saying, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, or something like that, I think is the translation.
Yeah.
Chris was really big into Latin phrases by then, and a lot of like philosophical things like that. So that one we also did there, but that was when we teamed up with a local record label called Goat Lord Records.
Awesome. I've heard of them.
Yeah, they were doing a bunch of like local punk and metal stuff. That was really cool. Yeah, those guys are the best. I still talk to them from time to time. So.
Yeah, and what's the status of Social Infestation? Because on Metal Archives it says it's unknown.
Yeah, it is unknown. We sort of, I guess it was in 03 when we were doing. So 01 to 03, we were touring a lot more and getting stuff going. And then in early 03, we actually tracked most of an album that's never been finished. So what happened was we did that, and our bassist and vocalist is Troy Sanders from Mastodon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so he, Mastodon had just signed to Relapse Records at the time. We were doing a lot of regional dates with those guys way in the beginning, in the early days. Yeah. And then he was just like, hey man, we got offered this 60-day tour with High on Fire. It was like 30 days in Europe and 30 days in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
And at that time we'd been a three-piece for a little while, just me and Chris and Troy, and then. He was like, hey, I'm going on tour for 60 days. And so Chris and I were like, well, we don't want to sit around with our thumbs up our ass. So, and then Chris was getting into black metal a lot and stuff. And he was like, hey, let's start this black metal thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, but I want to switch back to guitar.
Yeah, and that's, of course, the origins of Withered.
Exactly right, yeah. So.
Yeah, and I know that this year is also 20 years of Withered.
It is, yeah.
So did you think that you guys would be around for like 20 years?
Hell no. No, man, I actually remember back then when we started Withered, it felt like starting a band late. Because I was, how old was I? I don't know, 20... Shit, so it was 2003. Yeah, so I was like 25 or something, 26 maybe.
Yeah.
And we, I remember thinking that we wanted to go all in, like just like, this is going to be no bullshit, just touring and like just really go for it because we were really into the few songs we had written. And then I remember thinking like, oh yeah, I'll give this till I'm like 40 max probably, and then I'll be bored or burnt out or whatever. But no, here I am. I'm about to be 46 years old. So
yeah. And then of course, tell me about like the first release demonstration in 2004. Was that like something to like send out to labels to help promote Withered?
Yeah, we wanted to. I mean, we really live to tour. Like that's for me at least is my number one thing is to travel and do this in front of anyone that'll let me do it. Right. So we just were like, hey, we can't hit the road without a demo, like you gotta have something. So we hooked up with a buddy, Mike Green, who decided to we asked him to do a demo, which he did in our practice space actually.
Nice.
And we did like 5 songs, and then we took it on tour. So
Awesome.
and actually those tracks ended up being like the 5 songs off of the first record.
Yeah, Memento Mori. Like, what was like the thought process going into making the debut Withered album?
It was sort of like I was very lightly into black metal. I only liked very few black metal bands. Like to me, up to that point, black metal was more of a like more of the cartoony side of it, the more operatic, dramatic, Cradle of Filth or something like that, you know. And then, but Chris started turning me on to some of the crustier stuff, and was started listening to Dodheim's Guard, and I think that first Weakling album was really revelatory for me. That was a huge inspiration, which you can hear on that record a little bit. And ultimately, it was my poor attempt at writing black metal because I never really had. So
yeah, but also like the whole like Swedish sound was in that first album. Like, of course, Dark Funeral.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I one of my probably my all-time favorite death metal band is Grave. I think like that was the first band that really turned my head when it came to death metal, and them and Entombed along the same. But
were you also into like Bloodbath and Dismember at the time?
Yeah, I got to Dismember later on. I'm a light Bloodbath fan. I like them. I like their stuff. But
start to see them at Maryland Death Fest next year.
Yeah, man. I'm really hoping to make it up for that. So
yeah, who knows? Get Withered on MDF
next
year.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
If the guy who's running this watching this.
Yeah.
But I also love how like there's like different styles and like the tones, like Beyond Wrath was like more like the old school death metal, and like within your grief also has very harsh sounding. So I guess there's like different trials, different emotions on each of the songs on the first record.
There is. Well, to touch back on your last question, the idea for me was the loose theme was the grieving process. So each song is sort of loosely representing a stage of the grieving process, because my father had died sort of by surprise shortly before we formed the band, so that was really fresh on my mind. And the other guys also had their own fair share of loss and stuff that all kind of fed into the concept there, and that was
Yeah, and I know 2025 will be the 20-year anniversary of the album. Is there any chance? I know it's like far in advance, but is there a chance maybe you could do a celebration, maybe play it start to finish?
We've been talking about ideas like that, but there's no concrete plans yet. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we're still trying to catch up on a bunch of stuff, but yeah, hopefully, yeah, I would love to do something like that.
All right, and then going forward to the next album, Folie Circulaire.
Yeah, that's it.
Usually with the debut album, you have like your entire life to write, and there's a lot of hype with it. When it came time to making the second album, did you feel like pressure to follow up Memento Mori?
No. Luckily, for some reason, we just I'm trying to remember. Like it all was pretty innocent back in those days as far as that goes. Luckily, when we write, it's very sort of a surreal thing. It's not like we get into a headspace, or I do at least, where it's very easy for me to detach from everything outside of the room when we're doing it. So we're getting more and more into even Swedish black metal and stuff, which I think shows a little bit. And for me, the whole thing was we're always just trying to be like black metal Neurosis, because that's one of my all-time favorite bands as well.
Yeah, it definitely has that kind of sludgy vibe on this album.
Yeah.
But I especially love like the intro, which goes into like Faded Breath. Has like that hybrid of like the sludginess and with the black metal. So I'm guessing like almost everybody at the band at the time has like a different influence that brings it into Withered, right?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like you want to use all the tools in your toolbox, right? So like everything you have access to as a group, I don't know. I think things are just much more rich when you figure out a way to integrate things, especially things that aren't typically integrated. So that's how you come up with fresh things and exciting new things. So.
All right, and then the next album is Dualitas. I love that album. What's that like going from Folie to that?
I think we were definitely more mature, and like both of those albums were done at the Jam Room in South Carolina with Philip Cope as producer. So the second time around, obviously, we were a lot more comfortable with him and the guys at the studio, and so it was a lot more sort of focused and cohesive, And actually, it was our first record without Chris. He had left the band, and so it was our first album with Dylan, who was our second guitarist at that time.
Yeah. Did you still, like, around that time, still play locally around Georgia, or did you play, like, out-of-state stuff?
Oh, we were touring all around the. Well, we had done Europe once. Mastodon took us over there in 05 after our first record came out, and then we did a bunch of North America stuff. After that, we were touring quite a bit then. So, and we had and it was our second album with Prosthetic Records.
Yeah.
So we were touring a lot. And we were doing. I mean, of course, we were playing around here whenever it made sense to do so, but most of the time it was just because we were on tour, passing through. So it's kind of
just be logical.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
And then the next album, Grief Relic, I loved that album. And funny enough, that was the album that got me into Withered and how I discovered you guys. Tell me about, like, the making of that album.
Man, I tell you what, like, I always, in the back of my head when we do records, I sort of parallel it to the Metallica records. Like, we always lightheartedly say, oh, this is our Master of Puppets and this is whatever. So Grief Relic was our And Justice for All, which, like I was just explaining, that's probably my all-time favorite album.
Yeah,
right?
but with bass.
Yeah, but with bass. Yeah, well, we can learn from their mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Well, the parallels are pretty uncanny because right after the touring cycle for Dualitas, our bassist and other guitarist quit the band.
Yeah.
All good, everything's amicable, still, love those guys. But life gets in the way sometimes, or priorities change. But anyway, so it was just me and Bo, and we started writing the record by ourselves, which is, for me, when I was in high school, I did a lot of book reports on Metallica's history and stuff like that. So it was really funny to me that, because back then Lars and James pretty much sat down and did it all right after Cliff dying and all that sort of thing. And I think that's what emboldened them with that anger and all of that stuff that was going into it. They also had the confidence of all the records prior to that. And this is very much how that felt. Like we buckled down and we wanted to write something that was kind of pushing the extremities for us. So I think it's that's why it's so much more like a death metal record than anything else.
Yeah, I noticed there was like a 6-year gap between Dualis and Grief Relic from 2010 to 2016. And of course, the reason was, of course, with the member changes and everything.
Yeah, it was the member changes. We were also weren't on Prosthetic Records anymore, so we were just we wanted to get an idea of what the album was going to be before we decided to settle on how we wanted to release it. So before we started talking to other labels and stuff, we wanted to get half of it down. And then on top of it, we also were working with Ethan and Colin for that record, which both, Ethan's in Denver and Colin's in New York. So trying to navigate that as a new experience as well, and getting everyone's schedules to line up to do it. Just proved to be time consuming. So it took a while.
Yeah, and I remember the first time I believe saw Withered, you played with Creator and Obituary in 2017.
Oh, that was one of the Decibel things, right?
Yeah, it was the Decibel tour. That was the first time I saw you guys. And
cool.
Ever since then, I've become a fan.
Oh, awesung. That's cool, man.
Yeah, and I think I've seen you play with a bunch of different bands. You played with, of course, Creator. I know you played with who else? Like Goat Whore.
Those are good buddies.
Cap, and I know you're gonna do a tour with them coming up. So you play with a lot of different bands. Like, do you ever notice a different crowd reactions?
Oh yeah, always. It's it's always interesting for us. We always feel like we don't belong anywhere. Like we kind of stick out a little bit for some reason. I think it's because we traverse so many different styles, right? It's like you kind of need to be a metalhead that likes a lot of different types of metal. You know what I mean? Like if you're just a death metal guy, you're gonna get bored when we go into the doomier stuff, I guess, and vice versa. So it's interesting to try and find that cross section of people that sort of get into a little bit of everything, which is how I am. I'm pretty open minded.
Pretty much like I am too.
Yeah. So it's cool. It's a lot of fun, and it always surprises you. I would say, we did a thing. We toured with Cattle Decapitation a while back, years ago. But then they came through a couple of years ago, and one of the band's van broke down and couldn't make it.
Yeah, and I remember you actually filled in for that. I was at that show. It was
they called me up.
It came out. Their new album came out that day in Atlanta.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they called me up and they were like, "Hey, you think you guys can pull this off?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure, we'll try." And we did.
And success.
Yeah, it was great. It was great, and it turned out the crowd was really like I couldn't believe the crowd response. I thought because it was all tech bands, right? All tech death metal bands. I thought that they were going to hate us, but the response was fantastic. Sold a bunch of merch, and I think it was just because it was a younger crowd. You know what I mean?
And I think you have like the appeal to like every band. Like hell, you could play with like Nickelback, and everybody would love you.
Oh, that would be an interesting experiment. Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
I wouldn't say no.
It could happen. It could happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't say no to that. That'd be the wildest thing ever.
Yeah. And then of course your latest album, Verloren. I love that album. Probably one of my favorite albums of 2021. Tell me about like that. That going from Grief Relic to Verloren. Yeah,
well, I mean, again, we had because Ethan and Colin were sort of like friends that helped us put Grief Relic together, right, and finish it out. But since Ethan was getting super busy with Primitive Man, and Colin's got his studio and stuff, Colin was mostly just doing the album with us. There's really no intentions for him to play live, so we had to get a live guy to fill in, which is Rafe, who's our bass player now, full time. When it came time to ride again, basically we decided the long distance thing was pretty cumbersome and wasn't as enjoyable, and we all agreed on that. So we decided to find some local guys. So I finally called up my buddy Dan, who was in Sons of Tonatia and Leech Milk from back in the 90s. We used to do a lot of shows with them with Social Infestation. And Dan was always one of my favorite vocalists and stuff, and I knew he was a good guitarist, and I liked the riffs that he wrote and stuff like that. So I hit him up to join us, and luckily he did. And then we locked in Rafe. Rafe wanted to do it anyways, and he's one of my oldest friends too. So anyways, we sort of did that and put it all together. So it was our first writing experience with those guys. So that was interesting. On top of it, we were about half done writing the record when we then went on tour in Europe. And then literally we came back, we went in the studio, and like the third or fourth day we were in the studio was when the lockdown happened for the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a bit of a mind fuck, just trying to wrap our head around what that was going to mean. Yeah. I mean, it was lucky for us. We were like, we're not touring. We're going to do a record.
Like dodged the bullet there.
Yeah, just barely, because we had just came out of Northern Italy too, where it was first starting to like really mess people up. So. So that was, but also it was like we didn't know if we would even be able to tour again, or if the record would even come out, or like all of the unknowns. So that was a big kind of looming thing over us while we were trying to write and record, and it definitely had an impact on the record.
Yeah, and I think that the album has a lot more of a positive kind of like vibe, and like songs like Casting the Wall, and even like the title track itself. Is that what kind of like the mind frame going into the album?
Man, I don't know if positivity is rarely our focus. I think that there's always sort of a...
Yeah, I feel like there's like a good vibe with how
we want it to be easy to sort of settle into, but I think for me it's sort of like... It's sort of like the world is shit, but it's okay. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like the feeling, I guess. Like it's sort of like a comfortable pessimism or something like that is the way it feels. And I guess also having done it for so long, it's really easy for me at least to get into that mindset. And these guys too, they've been through it all, as well. So we all share a lot of a lot of trauma in common and things like that fuel what we're doing.
Yeah, and I know like a lot, especially during the pandemic, like a lot of people would cite that as like sort of like an influence like in the world and stuff. And I know people even had like that like wrote albums in like 2018 or so and that came out in 2020 almost predicted almost the future.
Yeah, it's just crazy, right? Yeah.
So did you ever feel, was that almost kind of like an escapism in a way from the harsh realities of the world, the music?
A little bit. I mean, it always is, right? Like I said, anytime we get in the room and we're doing it, like being in the studio, it's a very magical sort of experience. It's really easy to detach from the world, and you don't even realize what time it is most of the time. Next thing you know, you've been in there for 14 hours cranking away, and you just have no idea.
Yeah.
So it's like, so that's a bit therapeutic. But again, that's sort of looming unknown of what's going to happen, what's next. Who knows? For me, the biggest thing was the idea of losing the ability to tour is something I've never contemplated before. I contemplate loss, and I overanalyze and overprocess everything in life and about the world. I'm obsessed with philosophy and existence in general, right? So it's like the human experience fascinates me. So, but that's the one thing that I always thought would be there for me, was the ability to just get in a band and go play shows, right?
Yeah.
Never for once thought, I just never conceived of the possibility that we would not be able to gather together in large groups at some point. That was really weird,
Yeah, and kind of want to talk about like the songwriting, because I like your guitar playing. It's very almost technical, but also very sludgy and has very good chord progressions. Are you almost?
Oh, thanks.
Are you like in have knowledge of like music theory, like what skills that you're working off of and stuff?
I learned a lot of that. I played saxophone in school and stuff like that, so I had some basis there. I took guitar lessons for a couple of years, and it gave me some fundamental stuff. So I have a fundamental appreciation of music theory, but I sort of intentionally abandoned it because I always get weird about indoctrination for a particular approach, right? So when it's something like music creative, it's probably much to my dismay, and it probably takes me a lot longer as a result of not knowing that I have to sort of stumble into the modalities or things like key changes and whatever you can get into from an analytical or theoretical perspective. I don't want to adhere too much to someone's train of thought, right? Like if you learn a lot about something, it's usually through someone else's filter, and I try to, when it comes to this, I really want to just trust my gut. It might take a lot longer to get there sometimes. I'll laugh because we can spend entire 2-hour rehearsals writing just a 10-second transition part between two main parts, just trying to get it to be just right and to hit that note. But for me, it's, as far as the guitar part of it goes, I want to be good enough just to not be limited, not being able to accomplish what I want to accomplish from a songwriting perspective. So I'm way more into songwriting rather than maybe guitar playing specifically. But you want to be adept enough at the instrument, to accomplish what you're after. So.
Right, and I also like the lyrics. Like I know it also talks about like despair and pretty much the harsh realities of the world.
Yeah.
Do you have to like put yourself in that mind frame or do you or when it comes to lyrics, does it just come naturally?
It's kind of all over the place sometimes. Sometimes it's a struggle because it's like, like I said, I kind of just follow my gut. So when the music is generating a particular emotion, right, or a vibe, then obviously we want the lyrics to sort of reinforce that. So we tend to write the lyrics after, even though sometimes the patterns and the style of vocal expression might be determined along the way or even ahead of time sometimes. Yeah. But then we say the lyrics sort of for the end so that we can make sure we're underpinning the mood, right? Because the mood of the song overall is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I know you're playing guitar, so you have to like figure out where the vocals lie, where you're on the fret. Like,
well, I try not to. I don't want to let the vocals limit the guitar parts, or vice versa, right? So I make a point to write them completely separate because I guess my hubris. I'm convinced that no matter what it is, I'll learn how to do them together. You know what I mean? Like I'll figure out a way to split my brain and be able, no matter what the vocal pattern is versus the guitar pattern, I'll figure out later how to do them together, right?
Yeah. And and one thing to note is like your vocal collabs with Dan, who's also singing as well. Well, when it comes to singing together, and I've asked bands to have like multiple vocalists, you also have to be like on the same mind frame, like or same page emotionally when it comes to like singing together, or do you figure out like who sings what?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, we try to sit down and sort of hash out what the vibe is, and if one of us has an idea for a particular song. So, for example, if the main theme of the song or the part that is sort of like the center, the main riff or something, or the main part that's generating the overall vibe, if I wrote it, then there's a tendency for me to do the lyrics at that point. And if Dan, if some of his riffs are making the main point in some songs, and we kind of follow it that way. Sometimes we'll write for each other's stuff, but we'll sit down and kind of discuss the concept that we come up with. So if somebody has a creative spark about a song, then we'll sit down and really figure out how to connect with each other on it, so that we are expressing the same way. Yeah.
Right. Have you ever get into fights like I'm singing this part or I'm singing this part?
No, never. No, it's very diplomatic. We kind of all sit down together. I can be really stubborn, that's for sure. With me being I was the youngest guy in the band when we started the band, and now I'm the oldest guy. Well, Dan's a little bit older than me now, but I'm definitely on the older end of the spectrum these days. So it's kind of funny to just evolve that way. But having been the only guy now that was there in the beginning, I am very attached to sort of honoring what we've always done,
right.
So I feel like I'm sort of a steward for whatever this general thing is, this main thing, so that we never lose touch with where we come from, and that kind of a thing. So I might get a little stubborn and protective in that way, but there are a lot of votes, and I try to keep my ears nice and open. If someone has a valid point about something, or sometimes, a lot of times, there's plenty of ideas that really shift a perspective for me or gets me out of a sort of a stuck mindset. That's a fresh idea, and these guys are great with that. They're all super creative. So.
Right, and being as it now be coming up on 2 years since Forlorn was released, have you all started working on the next Withered album?
Yeah, actually, we just started writing this month. Seriously, we always kind of have a lingering bucket of riffs and ideas of things that maybe didn't get used last time or didn't fit well with the theme.
Right.
And then, so we start dipping back into that and see if there's anything we want to use now. And then that usually is enough to kind of get the ball rolling. So yeah, we've just started writing again. So.
Awesome, and just got two more questions to ask.
Okay.
Coming from Atlanta, I know Atlanta has like a very diverse metal scene. Same thing with like if Europe has like, especially Sweden has bands. A band like Dark Funeral is different from a band like Dark Tranquility.
Oh yeah.
And stuff. But I know Atlanta has very diverse. Like a band like, of course, Withered is different from Cloaked, is different from Mastodon or Left to Suffer. So do you ever notice did you feel like comfortable being part of the Atlanta metal scene, or did you just wanted to get your name out there, like different like states, different countries and stuff?
I think anyone wants to get your name out there, right? To some degree. Atlanta is really unique in that regard, which is funny you ask that, because I was just talking about this the other day. That knowing all the bands, speaking of Cloak or Mastodon or even Royal Thunder and all that stuff, like we're all really close friends with all of those bands. But anyone from the outside may not, like all the bands are so different stylistically that there's not like an Atlanta sound,
Yeah.
where there's like a Gothenburg sound or a Stockholm or whatever, you know what I mean, like that kind of a thing, where like a lot of places there's a scene that has a general sound that everybody from there sounds like.
Yeah.
But Atlanta just doesn't do that, right? It's like really mixed bag of things, and I think maybe a lot of people on the outside don't realize that we are all friends and we all really like each other as musicians and bands, and like we wouldn't hesitate to play with a Royal Thunder, for example. Like that feels comfortable to me.
Yeah.
And that might also because we all sort of came up in that punk rock scene back where you play art spaces and stuff, and those days, man, and those places like intentionally would book indie rock bands with death metal bands and it would just be everything is cool, right? And that's sort of that's kind of where I grew up, was in that kind of a framework. So and I think it's still very true here as well. So yeah.
And kind of in the end, to wrap things up, what's next for Withered? I know you got that awesome tour with I Hate God and Goat Whore coming up. It's just anything else you would like to talk about?
Well, that's just one show actually. We're not doing the tour. They asked us to do just the Atlanta show with them.
Yeah.
But we are touring in May on a headlining tour because we're doing that Hell in the Harbor Festival.
Yeah,
I've
heard
Baltimore.
about that. It's sort of like the substitute for Maryland Death Fest.
Yeah, it seems like it is a little bit, but man, it's a badass lineup, man.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of great bands that I really love there. I'm a huge Napalm Death fan and stuff like that. So I'm not even sure if we're going to be there on the same day. We're actually doing the pre-fest show with Candlemass, which is which is going to be amazing. Yeah, I'm super excited about that. I still have yet to see them live.
Me too.
So I'm super pumped to get to open for them.
Yeah.
And then and there's a couple other things. There's the Catacombs Fest. I think that's what it's called. That's happening here in Atlanta in June. And we're headlining one of those days, which I'm real pumped about that because it's very much kind of that DIY punk rock vibe.
Oh yeah.
So man, I love playing small venues when you're in the crowd's face and stuff. It's it's good energy. And we're cooking on quite a few other things, so we'll see. We're working on some worldly stuff. Europe is pretty jacked up right now with the war and everything, so not sure about that, but I don't know. Yeah. We're going to try and get this record done otherwise, and see what happens.
Awesome. So thank you for this conversation, man.
Yeah,
There's just
thanks.
any final words you want to say to the viewers to close this out?
No, if you made it this far in the video, good for you. I guess we'll see you out on the road.
Yeah, so everybody, Mike from Withered, see you next time.